Bjarke Ingels is here. He has established himself as one of the world's most inventive and sought-after architects.
He's transforming the shape of New York as we know it today.
I think this sense of wit, the fun, is always there.
His current projects include a pyramid-shaped tower on Manhattan's west side, the fourth tower at the World Trade Center, a Danish power plant featuring a rooftop ski slope, and a collaboration with fellow architect Thomas Heatherwick on Google's new headquarters.
In a way, I see that having a style is having certain things you have to do all the time or certain things you would never allow yourself to do. A style is almost like the sum of all your inhibitions.
Architects have to become more than just designers of two-dimensional facades. We have to become designers of ecosystems. Architecture at its best is really the power to make the world a little bit more like our dreams.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome New York Times chief architecture critic Michael Kimmelman and his guest, founding partner and creative director of BIG, Bjarke Ingels.
Hi Bjarke, nice to see you.
It's a pleasure.
And nice to see all of you too. So, you're 40 years old, I think. And most architects at the age of 40 are still trying to figure out where their first job is going to come from. If they're not working in a firm, you're doing projects all over the world, and you're redesigning New York City. You have 3 major projects in New York now, and 2 World Trade, and West 57th Street, and the Dry Line. So let's talk a little bit about New York and what you're doing here for starters. Maybe we can begin by talking about 2 World Trade. You can tell us about what the project is and what you plan to do there.
Yes. I think if we have a little bit of some images. Yeah, so essentially it is, of course it's the World Trade Center site. It's also where 9/11 occurred almost 14 years ago. And it's also the cradle of the skyscraper. It's basically where the skyscraper as a typology evolved. It's also at the meeting point between Tribeca, like where you have like almost like European streetscapes, city blocks, and then financial district where you have the skyscrapers. And in a way, we thought we could almost like make a building that would feel equally at home in the two neighborhoods. So essentially, where the financial district used to be banks, just all kinds of financial institutions. Now it's becoming a place where a lot of different creative companies are going. So you have very different buildings within the building.
In a way, what happened with 9/11 changed the character of the neighborhood. So that the problem of the neighborhood being a kind of monolithic thing, people began to move in as there was opportunity. Now it's actually a place people want to live as well.
Exactly,
But this changes the character of the World Trade site as well, which was conceived at the end of the last century, really, as this office park, yeah?
Yeah, I think like one of the things you've seen in New York is that over the last decade, maybe the skyscraper has gone from being a purely business-driven architectural typology into a place where people live. When you look at 57th Street, high-rise row, it's all these like ultra-high-end condos where they can just like look out and see the park. And I think
is that a good thing?
I think one of the interesting things about architecture and urbanism is that as architects, we're not really the creators of the city. We are rather like the midwives. Essentially, we sort of assist the city in giving birth to itself. So you can't, as an architect, say that now I would like to do, a 3 million square foot skyscraper, and it's going to be the home of this kind of company and this kind of company. It's the completely other way around. Like there is a need, there is a desire, and then we have a capacity to try to translate that those concerns and demands and dreams into physical form.
Yeah, but you make the architect sound a little more passive or receptive then maybe I'm comfortable with it. Do you think the architect really is just sort of receiving other people's ideas and realizing them? There's no agency?
I think there is. It's a bit like if you are painting a portrait. You can say architecture is like portraiture. Is that you can say it would be sad, and I think this is true for some architects, is that no matter who you're painting a portrait of, it looks like yourself in a way. Whereas I think the mission is to be able to capture not only the appearance, but the character, the personality, the aura, the soul, if you like, of the subject you're trying to portray. And that means that if you are listening and observing as an architect, you will find the ingredients that will make one building look radically different from another building, because you're trying to capture completely different situations.
Right, so what is Two World Trade then? What are you trying to capture, and what's the personality at stake?
I think one of the things we
By the way, who's your client?
It's for News Corp and Fox, and of course it's also for Silverstein. So Silverstein is like this sort of archetypical Manhattan real estate developer, and then News Corp and Fox.
What are they?
And also this sort of I don't know, like a disruptive media company.
Okay.
But so I think it's like that encounter already is quite interesting. I think you can see from above, it's like almost these sort of hanging gardens where you actually have the different city blocks that are proportioned, for film studios and TV studios on the lower levels, newsrooms on the higher levels, and that actually leaves space to actually have giant gardens on multiple levels.
Okay, so now I have to ask you, have you ever been in a garden on a balcony on the 80th floor of a building? It's windy up there, Bjarke.
I think it's. I have much too rarely been on a garden on the 80th floor of the building, because I think when I came to New York 5 years ago, I noticed that real estate developers, they didn't want outdoor space at all. They just saw it as nuisance, and the general sort of truism was that, which is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, is that. Yeah, but nobody really looks for balconies. That's because hardly any buildings had balconies. And I think once you get the outdoor space, I think Silverstein was realizing that the one outdoor space that they have on the Marquee Tower at the World Trade Center has been sort of incredibly sought after. And in that sense, I think you're going to see more and more that office is not just something that happens in sort of an infinite landscape of cubicles where you have no conception of the outside. There is like this sort of much more flexible and dynamic workspace, and retention. The fact that you actually create a lovely work environment is becoming more and more important.
I'm with you, but I'm anxious to see how that works when you're actually out there in anything but a day like this, when it's really windy and cold. It's a lot to ask of somebody out on the 80th floor.
I come from Denmark, yeah, exactly. So which is and I think the only car you should have in Denmark, in general people bicycle, but the only car you should have is convertible car, because if the sun is always shining, who cares? But if you're living in a country where it's hardly ever nice to be outside, then you really have to enjoy every second of it.
Anyway, tell me a little more. So the stack goes up.
Yeah, so basically also it's basically like here you're seeing it from the Tribeca side, where it has like this kind of abstract avant-garde accumulation of city blocks. Also, as the building gets higher, it also gets wider. So you get this sort of downward facing news ticker, because actually News Corp and Fox are running the news ticker on Times Square. So now it's actually going to move down here.
And how high will those tickers be? How readable do you think that they'll be from the ground?
They'll be a 10-foot tall, nice, big, legible writing. But then also, then you'll see on every single, we try to make multiple levels enjoy the outdoor gardens. Mm-hmm. So here you are sort of on the 30th floor. In other places, we're having conference spaces with little courtyards. So you actually have, in the middle of a very big building, you have these very small and intimate moments that you normally wouldn't associate with working on the 50th floor.
So I stuck in here a Google slide. This is a slide from the plan you have to Thomas Heatherwick to do the campus at Google in Silicon Valley. And I put it in because sometimes when I look at your projects, I see recurring motifs. And so tell me, you know, or at least I see an idea of what a workspace is, what life is like, really, that is in your head. I'm not sure it's actually out there, but it's in your head. And it looks like this. So what's the connection?
Well, I think it's, you know, when the internet arrived and IT exploded and everybody thought suddenly like physical location and proximity became irrelevant. But paradoxically, the big discovery is that when you're working with innovation and a major part of developing products or services is to try to connect the dots, that it is actually the physical proximity, the visual and physical connectivity between you and your colleagues and the different consultants that drives innovation. And if you can see your colleagues, you might go and talk to them. You might remember, I had to talk with this guy about this thing. And if you can see the stair, if it's not just a fire stair, but you can actually see the stair going a few floors up or down, you are enticed to take it instead of waiting for the elevator. And I think the more you sort of, the more the architecture invites for this sort of interaction, both physically and visually, the more you're going to accelerate the exchange of ideas and the speed of innovation.
I mean, I hear this, and I know that this is what people say. And I think I told you one time, going out to look at these offices in San Francisco. And I was talking to people from Gensler and elsewhere, some of the architectural firms that were designing these offices and people who worked there. And I said, how do you like your open office? Which had, you know, the usual ping pong tables and the place to eat and all this kind of stuff, and everyone was sitting together. And I finally went up to these guys who were working at a desk together, the sales force of one of these firms. I said, how do you like this? And they sort of stood at attention because I was with the CEO of the company and the guy from the architectural firm, Gensler. And there was a moment of awkward silence, and the guy said, I hate it. I said, why? He said, because this guy sitting next to me is on the phone. He never shuts up. I can't hear myself think. I have no place to go to get peace quiet. So my question for you is, so now the moment is that offices are supposed to look like this. Open, connectivity, the sense of, is this actually how people want to work? Is it really? Do we think that's where it's going?
Yeah, I think...
you work in an architecture firm. Everyone's quiet, sitting behind a desk.
Because like architects are so well behaved. I was trying to click the back button. Yeah, here. So I think the problem of the office landscape, and I think this is one of the sort of inherent flaws of modernism, was that there was this idea that there was, for every question, there was a universal answer. So that in a way there was the perfect solution for everything. You had this idea of the residence for existence minimum, like this sort of idea that you could monitor the movements of a housewife in the 50s in the kitchen, and then you could design the perfect kitchen. Also, you could create the perfect workspace that was this sort of universal array of cubicles, which became the office landscape. And I think what we're seeing is we've conducted some analysis on Googlers, and they actually have surprisingly a higher percentage of introverts than a typical work environment. Of course, like a lot of them need to code, so they need to be able to focus, like plugging into the matrix. And in that sense, what we are providing, as you can see, is that there is actually a lot of spaces that are contained where we're controlling acoustics and the visual environment, but then the way that they connect, they create these sort of cascading landscapes. So essentially, I think what you're seeing today is that the idea of the universal answer has been abandoned in favor of basically realizing if people are different, then workspaces need to be different, residences need to be different, you need to provide diversity.
Let's move on with the building, because I want to talk to you about the site as well of Two World Trade. And something about the shape of the building you've designed. This, by the way, is the top of the building, right? A screening room?
Yeah, it's everybody involved's dream that since we are designing a project for a cinema company to have the screening room where the view after the film might be even more mesmerizing than the images you see during the film.
Yeah. So Fox is a cinema company. I hadn't realized that. I thought did some else. But go on. I think we have some slides of the site as well. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about a lot of your. We can't talk about your architecture without talking about the formal aspects of it, and often asymmetry and a kind of dynamism, a kind of playfulness, is just inherent in the language you use. In fact, here there's a quality to this building from certain angles. I think it almost looks off balance. And I heard you once mention that someone referred to this they saw as different metaphors for the meaning of this. To me, I see this as kind of reconstructing the Twin Towers in a different way, but the way these buildings will be perceived as a kind of not identical twin. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit, before we talk about the site itself, about your notion of the relationship of the building to One World Trade. And by the way, what do you think of One World Trade? I'm not so fond of it.
Well, actually, I also noticed that Banksy, when he was in New York, he had proposed an article, I think, for the New York Times, that you finally chose not to print. But where he was writing about One World Trade, and then he had put in a space holder that says "replace with better artwork," which was kind of hilarious. But I must say that I personally do like One World Trade quite a bit, because I do think that the skyscrapers, and in a city that invented the skyscraper, Chicago might dispute that statement, but the skyscrapers that really stand the test of time are the skyscrapers that are the most confident, the ones that are a pure manifestation of a blatant idea. So it was like the Grace Tower by Bunshaft, Lever House, Seagram, a lot of the sort of classic SOM towers down in
Woolworth.
Exactly, and like the Flatiron, this like a perfect extrusion of a triangular lot. And I think then there was a moment, you got like postmodernism, where you have like a generic extrusion with an interesting hat. And then came sort of the aftermath of postmodernism, where the confidence was gone, the blatancy was gone, and then every tower had to be sort of a little bit insecure, and then just to show that it was also responding to the surroundings, you had to like mess it up. And I think at least One World Trade has some of the blatancy of a big idea. Of course, it's also being penalized by having to respond to so much security code. But,
so the site there, let's talk about that site for a while. I can't help but feel it's an office park. Why is this not an office park? Why are you not just building another tower for an office park? Is it? Is that what it is?
No, I think what it is that it's it's essentially the last piece in what I really see to be the revitalization of downtown Manhattan, because 9/11 didn't just like blast the Twin Towers. It also started a migration away from downtown Manhattan that further got exacerbated by the financial collapse in 2008.
Actually, but we were just saying a second ago, it started a transformation of downtown Manhattan into a much more mixed-use place, where you had a lot of companies moving in and also residents. It did certainly eliminate some of the big corporate office towers, but Goldman's gone up there and others have too.
No, but I agree, but it really started with a massive migration away, which also then opened up the doors for like the classic sort of processes. Then, rents drop, pioneers come in, you have a whole new kind of tenant base. We moved to the intersection of Wall Street and Broadway. I love to proclaim that it's the perfect location for an architecture office, because it's at the intersection of the quintessential street of commerce and creativity. Yeah. So you couldn't be located more nicely. And we actually have cheaper rents than in Chelsea. So in that sense, you're seeing a whole new neighborhood coming. Then with the aftermath of 9/11, 8 acres of park has suddenly created a big oasis, which is of course the memorial, but it's also like a really, really lovely
space. Do you think it works as a park?
I think you can see that if you go there now, even though there's still a lot of construction going on the perimeter, you really sense that it is a really big new park.
And you think people will use it as a park?
Definitely.
New Yorkers.
I think that's inevitable.
So it also has we'll see. It also has the Calatrava station, the Path Station, which, would you like to say something about it? If you don't, I will.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, I think, again, like, I think I also like to look at the positive side of things. And of course, a lot of people might question if it was really worth $4 billion. But I think what we have to remember is...
I've never heard anybody mention the number, but okay, yeah, I guess so.
and I think that's even the optimistic number. But for a subway stop,
yeah, exactly.
It does sound generous.
And for a shopping mall.
But I do think that what we should remember is that I think it's going to be a spectacular neighbor. I love this idea of this sort of dinosaur skeleton stranded between the skyscrapers. And I think the canopy creates
a... You get the metaphor? I still don't get that metaphor.
The Oculus, I'm not sure, like, but I think it has this like skeletal quality that I do think has something almost Jules Verne, something like 19th century heroic structure. And that brings me to, we're doing a project at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. So I've been taking Amtrak like countless times. And you know, the main station in DC is a wonderful sort of the civic architecture, a generous, accommodating public space full of like live activities, and some of the best shoe shiners in the country. You have like Philly Station, and then you have Penn Station, which is the absolute opposite. It's from this time where everything had to be so utilitarian and so rigorous that space was purely measured in floor space. Ceiling height, forget about it. The idea that you could have sort of an architectural solution that would make navigation and orientation intuitive was replaced by having the most stressful space in all of Manhattan, where you have this like very, very flat claustrophobic space with a single billboard where everybody's like dying to see which gate they have to board from. So I think in that sense, what I do see with the Oculus is a return to a realization that public infrastructure is public space, and it can't just be measured on purely utilitarian means. It has to be something else. And then everybody's criticizing it for being a giant shopping mall. But actually, and I've been looking at a lot of photos of how beautiful Penn Station used to be. It was probably the most beautiful of all the stations, but it had zero income. So essentially, in the end, it was bankrupted. So in a way, you need to provide something like it was almost too good to be true, like literally. In the end, it couldn't remain true, and it got replaced by this like ultra utilitarianism. And what you need is somehow to find hybrids where you have both the public generosity, but also financial feasibility.
Yeah, fair enough, and we won't dwell on this too long, but I would say that while it is true that Penn Station was insupportable economically at the end, it was serving an enormous number of the people. Path Station there will serve optimistically 50,000 people and otherwise be a shopping mall. So the public expense of those $4 billion has to be weighed against.
I think there's probably a piece of calculus that I'm not going to be an expert of.
But let's talk for a second. Let's skip ahead in the time we have just very quickly to look at the project that you're doing, speaking of infrastructure, called the Dry Line. So could you skip to the Dry Line, if you could?
Yeah, basically
because this is an example, I think, a bit, yeah?
Yeah, I think
explain what it is, if you would.
Yeah, the Dry Line was basically triggered by Sandy, the fact that it wiped out all of Lower Manhattan. I think according to the New Yorker, it gave rise to a whole new neighborhood in New York. And the basic idea is to try to provide all of the necessary resilience, all of the infrastructure necessary to protect the city from the next flooding, but in a way that doesn't become a barrier, like a seawall that segregates the life of the city from the water around it, but actually becomes an amenity. You can say, like, we try to learn from the High Line, because the High Line, I think, is interesting because it is a piece of decommissioned infrastructure, former train tracks that have now become one of the most popular parks in the city. So our question was, what if you don't have to wait until the infrastructure gets decommissioned? What if you can actually design it from the get-go to come with positive social and environmental side effects? So the image you're seeing here is on the East River, which is phase 1 of the dry line that we're doing right now.
Just to be clear, so this goes from 23rd Street south, right? This is phase 1, and you didn't say this, but this grew out of a HUD-sponsored, federal-sponsored competition, right?
Exactly.
With a couple of $1 billion involved to look for resilient solutions around the eastern seaboard where Sandy had affected the areas like Manhattan, but also Hoboken and right? Just to be clear. So just step back one more second. So your idea was the waterfront of Manhattan was needed to be greened, yes? I'm just trying to fill in the missing piece, because why did you suddenly understand?
No, it is basically like if we're going to invest millions or even billions of dollars in protecting the city from flooding, if we're going to like order some concrete elements, so we're going to move in some cranes, we're going to like push some dirt around, we might as well do it in a way that doesn't create negative social side effects, because like everybody knows that a kind of Robert Moses
like
attitude,
a wall or something.
You can have like, all kinds of infrastructure projects come with side effects because they're so massive. So like highways that create like scary undersides, highways that segregate one neighborhood from another.
Well, what's already there?
The FDR is a typical example of how infrastructure has negative side effects. So we thought, like, what if we can take, because we know what needs to be done. We have all kinds of reports by the best engineers in the country, establishing what are the likely threats and how can we respond to them.
So you're creating what at that site? Just to be clear, you have, by the way, I think by winning this competition, you have some $300 or $400 million that are towards this project. And what's going to happen, and why isn't it being built already?
It is New York City that has the dollars, but we're helping them spend them wisely. But essentially, the idea is that as the whole stretch changes, in some places where you are here on this image, we have space with the East River Park. So there we're actually using the necessary berming to create a raised, resilient landscape that actually provides ADA access to the overpasses. We're making these generous bridges that are not like these caged catwalks, but actually like almost like little pieces of highline that flow over the landscape. It also protects the park from the noise of the highway, and it protects the city from flooding. You can see another example.
Where is this going to be?
Yeah, this as it is, it's not part of the funding, but it is on 10th Street. We thought it would be nice to extend this effort into the water to create a river bath. Because when basically the way we did it, this project was we knew what needed to be done, but we knew we didn't want to do Robert Moses. Like another sort of giant of urban history in New York City is Jane Jacobs. And there was this David Goliath moment where he tried to run a highway through Greenwich Village. She rallied the local community.
And others, yes, she was one.
Exactly. And defeated the plans. And we thought it would have been more interesting if they would have collaborated. So we thought the dry line, think of it as a love child of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. So essentially, because to resist an incoming Sandy, you need a very holistic 12 miles of contiguous waterfront protection. But to make it urbanistically successful, it needs to happen rooted in the local communities. So
what about community approvals? What's welcome to New York? How is this going so far?
Well, so far, what happens was that we spent the first 9 months of pregnancy actually meeting with representatives of all the different local communities all along the Big U. 6 months into the process, we started focusing on the East River part. So we met with people from good old Lower East Side Ready, Chinatown, like the whole works, and from good old Lower East Side, we were met with this typical criticism that now you're gonna change something, you're gonna trigger some massive gentrification, and we're gonna be sort of pushed out eventually. So there was in the beginning there was almost like a reluctance to serve your own interest.
Right.
But then I think what they saw was that we were not trying to push down a fait accompli. We were actually, at the next meeting when we met with them, we had taken notes of all the feedback they gave us, and we brought a smorgasbord, which is a Scandinavian word that has now become an American word. So I learned it going here. A smorgasbord of different options or different designs that would materialize some of their ideas. And together with them, we ended up sort of building together a whole set of ideas. For example, one of the ideas we had that got killed was the strategy of wet feet. So saying, what if we just, in all the Nitra housing, the public housing you have along the East River, what if we just move people out of the ground floor? We built a brand new building for all of the ground floor apartments, and then we put public amenities like little kiosks, community spaces, etc. on the ground floor. So we create a more diverse plan, and we rebuilt that ground floor so it can actually endure flooding. So that the buildings could actually stand with wet feet for a day or two. Nobody would have their house at risk, and it would actually bring a whole new set of programs for the neighborhood. But there the fear was, yeah, okay, you're gonna like move out the people from the ground floor, but you're never gonna build the other building. So I think there was also definitely a process of building trust that we're in the middle of right now.
Yeah, I look at you with astonishment with the idea that you would just go to a Nitra project and say you're gonna do this, and they would say, well, that's fine, that sounds like a good idea. That would be miraculous, but it is interesting, by the way, that there's a lot of discussion now, and there has been for years, but now it seems to be coming together as well, about rethinking these Nitra projects, many of which, of course, are orphaned and don't have any street life and have many needs. And so that's an interesting thought that you would have proposed, because it seems like a natural thing to do on campuses like that, to try to fill in the ground floor.
Yeah, and it's this idea of like trying to combine what needs to happen with what would be wonderful if it happened.
Obviously, people, at the lowest end of the economic spectrum of the city are extremely concerned, and rightly so, about changes to their neighborhoods. In the poorest neighborhoods like East New York and elsewhere, where all changes, even ones that are intended to bring economic benefits, are threatening the people who are least able to take care of themselves because they don't know where else to go. So the question here will be, when is this going to get started?
Ideally, we should have a shovel in the ground by 2017 for the East River portion.
Interesting. Before we finish with New York, let's do 57th Street, West 57, so I can make sure we've covered the three projects we mentioned. And this is actually, the shovel's more than in the ground. This is going to open by the spring or something like this?
Yes, we should start renting out apartments.
So what is this project?
It's
many of you may have seen it if you've driven along the West Side Highway.
Yeah, so basically this is where 57th Street meets the Hudson River. And we thought of it, staying in the subject of love children, that's the sort of the result when you made a American skyscraper with the density of American skyscraper, with the communal space of a Copenhagen courtyard building. Essentially, you get a building that is very asymmetrical, because the courtyard could quickly become too deep. It actually has the same proportions as Central Park, only it's 13,000 times smaller, so it's kind of a bonsai Central Park. But basically, because it's lowered to the height of a handrail in the southwest corner, you actually have sunshine and views from the courtyard. All of the homes that frame the courtyard have views over the Hudson River. They can see the sunset. And it's actually being built right now. This is a photo from recently.
How much the developer on this is Douglas Durst, and how much input did he have in this? I believe this project went through different iterations, didn't it?
Yeah, actually, it was when I met him, they had been trying to rezone the site for quite a while. I think they had already spent almost like a decade on the site for various elements. At some point, they had actually had approval for building a big data center, and then 9/11 happened, and then, as Douglas explained, then people no longer thought it was a good idea to store their data on the island of Manhattan. So like there's so many things that had sort of been sabotaging it, and then finally they came to us with the idea, and Douglas said, like, why don't you try to look at something like a mid-rise, more some of the things you've been doing in Copenhagen. And I was of course like very disappointed, because I finally get to build on Manhattan, and then they want me to do like a Copenhagen building. Come on. But then we were like going through it. We had something that was more like a courtyard building, but gently tilted to the southwest to bring in more light into the courtyard. So like an early iteration of this. And then at some point, when we were sort of 2 weeks from a big meeting with Amanda Burton, who was the chair of the Department of City Planning at the time, and then Douglas gives me a call and says, the distributed mass of the sort of tilted courtyard, it means we have too much staff. We need two staff lobbies, two entrances. Yeah. So basically, you just need to push all of the mass towards the east. Huh. And it was like sort of, but then keep everything else, he said. And that's like this typical sort of, yeah, but you know, that's. But then somehow we came up with this extreme version, and this is what we're building right now. But I'm quite certain that if we would have walked through the door on the 49th floor of One Bryant Park at the first meeting, with the design looking like this, that would have been the end of the conversation.
It would have said no.
But because it kind of happened as you went along, I think it is a quite interesting.
I mean, you have a project you've done before called The Mountain, and you obviously want to build buildings that also step up.
It's a kind of mountain envy from a Dane, where the tallest point is like what is it, like 400 feet, I think.
So listen, before we go, you know, you represent kind of, some people have said anyway, you know, you represent a Starchitect 2.0. I don't know how you respond to that idea, but talk to me just before we finish about where do you think architecture is going, and what you represent for architecture now. And I'll queer that a little by saying, there are those who would say that notion of the architect designing these spectacular buildings, which you certainly do, is already seeming like something from a different generation. So you seem like somebody who is trying to redefine this idea of the architect while retaining much of that identity that people like Rem and Zaha and others have. How do you see yourself, and how do you see it in relation to where architecture is going now?
I mean, I think from the starting point, we've always been interested in this idea that, let's say, like maybe like 99% of the profession and also of the built environment is made by reliable and rational analytical consultants that do things that are, you know, functional, but probably also a little predictable and a little boring. And then you have like a wild avant-garde that makes like spectacular, amazing works of art, but they're often also a little unpractical and maybe spectacularly expensive also. And I think where we try to position ourselves is in the very, very small overlap between the two, where we, in a way, we try to turn a rational and rigorous analysis into the performance of the building, into the driving force of the architecture. So if the court scraper, as we've also nicknamed it, the real name of the building is VIA, the court scraper is, in a way, trying to combine the communal space of a courtyard with the density of a skyscraper. And when you're trying to do those things, the asymmetry becomes necessary, because otherwise you wouldn't get daylight and sunshine into the courtyard, and the plants wouldn't grow, and it wouldn't be a nice place to be. So suddenly by putting like a rather rational sort of selection of elements that would be desirable together in a very unlikely combination, the architecture is forced into a seemingly expressive design, but it purely looks different because it performs differently.
Yeah, but what is the purpose of designing things that look spectacular or fun or eccentric or whatever you want to say? What is the use value of that, socially speaking?
I think it's back to this idea of the midwife. It's like the reason that West 57 looks the way it does, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to have this social space in the middle of a city as dense as Manhattan.
Yeah, but that particular design was not the only rational solution. There's a way in which you want to create buildings that are also striking. You're not saying what I thought you were going to say, which is that there's a kind of meaning and joy and pleasure or whatever that one gathers from a building that looks like that, as opposed to a lot of the other buildings in that.
No, but also, like, one of the things that in a way, because I mean, we always thought that it was the bringing the courtyard this idea of the big park at the heart of a Manhattan city block. That was the main communal agenda for this project. But one of the things that I've noticed now when you're standing on some of the terraces, maybe if you can go like 3 slides back, if you're standing on some of the terraces and you look up, something I'm going to get out of the chair here. One of the interesting things is that when you're standing here or here and you look out, you actually sort of look around, and like normally when you're inside a high-rise and then you look out at the rest of the city, and you have this sort of noir cliche of the alienated, the big city where you don't see the people that are close to you. Here, like you have, of course, the privacy when you're sitting in your terrace, but when you go to the edge, you'll actually look around and you'll meet your neighbors like on this man-made mountainside. And I think in that sense, much more than the only encounter you have, the only social encounter you have in a skyscraper is the awkward encounter in the elevator, where you're almost too close to each other to speak. But here, like there is this communal aspect that I think is gonna accelerate the social interaction in this building and make it a great place to live.
There's so many other things I want to talk to you about, but we should open it up to questions. Charles, perhaps you have some questions that
Absolutely. Yes,
people have asked you.
And if you have questions, feel free to send them to q@NY Times, or we'll take some for the audience. We have one actually that came in from David, and it came in when you were talking about 2 World Trade Center, and he asked, how does this accommodate resiliency and how cities are changing? Because of climate change, because of threats like terrorism, how is this different from a building that you would have designed or anyone else would have designed 30 years ago?
I think like the general notion of resilience in the notion of essentially weather protection, or like is very much taken care of by the master plan, that it is already sort of located at an elevated level. I think where it's different, and I think much more urban than the World Trade Center that it replaces, was that previously it was sitting on this giant podium that was blocking off all of the continuity of the streets of Manhattan. And I think one of the successes of the master plan that replaces it is that all of the streets of Lower Manhattan has actually been like tied back together again. So it actually becomes a continuous neighborhood and not just like some big weird modern block or suburban block bumped into the downtown Manhattan. And I think also, again, like programmatically, the fact that it is not monofunctional in the sense that it is just like this typical extruded skyscraper that duplicates an identical floor plate for the identical phantom client 100 times on the same side. But it is literally like very different buildings within the building that can accommodate very different things, will ensure a much more lively and vibrant neighborhood than the financial district that you know from the past.
That may not be the resilience answer you wanted, but it's true that the neighborhood is being partly reconstructed. It'd be nice if a lot of the streets had been truly opened, and we didn't have so much of the security issues we have there. But obviously, part of the attempt was to create more of a neighborhood. Yeah, Charles.
From Caroline, a question had come in. You're attempting to revitalize and transform city architecture. Is there any hope for suburbs where businesses and corporations are also located? What are your thoughts on revitalizing the burbs?
I mean, I think very much what we're doing right now with Google is, I think it's kind of interesting because, like, you can say the corporate headquarters was somehow the main sort of place of experimentation for the American architectural avant-garde, let's say in the 50s and 60s, and then it kind of petered out. But there was like this moment where like architects like Gordon Bunshaft and Eero Saarinen, they were like bringing to the world the most amazing works of architecture, and they were like to accommodate work for American corporations. Then that kind of disappeared. I think right now we're working on 2 World Trade, and then we're working for Google, which is 2 projects of similar size, but in as radically different urban context you can possibly imagine.
But the Google project, so far as I understand, is running into headwinds in Mountain View, because the community there thinks it's too big, right?
No, it was actually the story is that Mountain View is upzoning in general.
Yeah.
And there was a specific amount of extra density that Mountain View was willing to put out
to Google?
to award in general. And then all the companies in Mountain View could apply for it. And Google applied for all of it, and only got some of it. But that was the media spin was a massive failure. But I think they just tried to see if they could get it all, and they got some. So in that sense, but I think what we did notice when we were looking there is that the sheer magnitude of Google in Mountain View in terms of numbers means that they are much more like a neighborhood than a building. And you can't then just make a scaled up building, because then you're going to have like these weird exclusion zones in the middle of the urban tissue. And therefore, Google has made like a very conscious stance to become a neighborhood. And also
for everybody in Mountain View.
For everybody in Mountain View, like parts of the project consists of these transparent canopies that cover a more village-like conglomeration of workspaces. But parts of those canopies you can actually walk under. There's this green loop that actually travels underneath the canopy, which is for the public. And we're also making sure to integrate retail and ideally also as much housing as possible.
On the campus.
On the campus. Like Google wants as much housing as possible, but they're actually the environmentalists are afraid that people moving in there might have pets that could disturb some of the wildlife. So you have all kinds of scales of concerns that you somehow have to marry in these events.
Environmentalists, they're such annoying people.
Well, yeah, so like it would be terrible if people would move in and have a dog.
Let's take one more question from the audience. Does anyone, ma'am? I think we have a microphone. If you wouldn't mind bringing it down. Thanks. Sure.
Hi, Saskia.
Hi. Well, I think you're doing great work. So let me ask you a slightly provocative question. What was the biggest mess you ever wound up doing, where you really had to sort of struggle out of it? Or it never happened? Maybe it never happened to you.
It's a good question.
Finding an answer.
No, like I'm sure I'm trying to find a good answer. I mean, I must say, like almost any project is or slowly becomes a mess. And I think in that sense, and I think also that in that sense, when you finally inaugurate a building, like any building, it's a very traumatic moment, because all you see is the sum of all the failures. Like every corner is like some kind of a lost battle or like sort of undesirable compromise. Or but then once the hurt heals, you also notice all the things that went well, right? And I think in that sense, almost that's also like sometimes people say, yeah, so like now, what are you going to do now? Like you did everything. Like, so what are you going to retire? And sort of like, what do you mean? Like we haven't even started showing the world what we can really do if we really get the confidence and the resources. And so I think in that sense, it is very much like a snowball. I do want to say that probably the most complex thing we have worked on, paradoxically, is the 2 World Trade Center. It's like politically also like all of the heritage and the sort of symbolism, the emotional. I've learned to say baggage, not luggage. It comes with, and also the fact that it sits on 11 subway lines and a service road and a power plant and all these things. So I think, and the fact that they had already placed the columns and the cores based on another design. So I think there, but I think in a way, I think in architecture, maybe to give you a real answer to your question, I think in architecture, your biggest problem is that it's very hard to find any reason to go beyond the standard solution. And the standard solution is often becomes the standard solution because it's such a good solution to what you're trying to do. But the problem of it is that it's often looking at a single criteria. And a typical standard solution in architecture is a kind of very Bob Moses New York public housing. So that you need X amount of units, they need east-west exposure, they need a minimum distance between them, there's a certain height that's good for the elevator runs and the amount of fire stairs. So then you have like a slab, it's oriented like this, and then the next slab comes here, and then the next slab comes here. But it says nothing about diversity of household types. It says nothing about programmatic diversity to create a lively neighborhood. It says nothing about the life between the buildings or the prevailing winds, or like there's so many other factors you can take into consideration. And I think the secret recipe that we have developed that allows us to go beyond the standard solution is that we don't try to just provide X amount of real estate within a certain density. We actually try to pile on more demands. We also need to create a nice social space at the heart of the city block. We also need to ensure sunlight exposure, outdoor spaces, all kinds of things. And as you sort of pile on these demands, suddenly the standard solution doesn't work any longer, and you force the architecture into something different. I like to use the comparison to a game of Twister. Is that when you start the game, you just stand there in a standard pose because it's not so difficult. But then as you pile on demands, you find yourself with your hand and your feet and with your face butting up against body parts of family members. And the game becomes acrobatic and enjoyable. And it's in a way the same in architecture. By piling on more demands, by actually making the architectural problem more difficult to solve, we escape the straitjacket of the standard solution, and we come up with something that answers a more difficult problem.
Bjarke, thank you so much. That was so much fun. Thanks. So, yeah. What's that? So,
You got enough for
to all of you, let me say thank you so much for being here. I want to invite you out to have cocktails outside and tell you that breakfast is at 8 tomorrow morning, and we start seating everybody here at 8:30. So we look forward to seeing you in the morning. We have a wonderful long day. Thanks.